everyone. Okay, it's recording and it's focused. The lens was loose. It must have got shaken off the camera slightly.
Oh, the lens was loose?
Yeah, the lens was loose, so it wasn't autofocusing. It wasn't connected.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah. It almost.
Well, good morning, everyone. Oh, hi, Margie. Good morning. Welcome to the Desert Caballeros Western Museum. I'm Dan Finlay. I'm the executive director here, and it's a treat to have you all this morning. Boy, lots of familiar faces here today. Thank you, Miss Emily, for fixing the microphone. We have a technical request of all of you, but mostly our speaker. We are recording this presentation, and that's great, but when you all ask a question, that does not get picked up on the recording, so we will either have Eduardo repeat the question, or anybody want to run around with the microphone? Do we have a second microphone?
Yes.
See if we can do that. All right, before we get to the program, Miss Kathy Clark, please come on up and give us a little update on membership and all things development. Kathy.
All right, thank you, Dan. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for all your membership support. I will say, we take renewals and memberships all the time. However, coming in April is one of our 2 membership months where we have a bit of a discount on membership if you'd like to join. And if you paid today for your admission rate here, that will also apply to your membership. So today. But in April, our membership month goes the whole month. And in the middle of the month, on the 18th, we will have a member appreciation evening. And you all the members will receive an email about that, where we just like to appreciate you, and we will have appetizers and a chance to win one of our good baskets from ranch dressing. So our retail manager puts together a very nice basket, and you will have a chance, if you attend, you will have a chance to win that. But next, I would love to talk about, at the end of the month, March 28th through the 30th, we have Cowgirl Up opening weekend. I see the hand clap, I agree. It is our 20th anniversary this year. So if you would like more information on that, you can come see myself or Tara in the administrative office. We'd be happy to help you attend that weekend. And the exhibition opens on the 28th, and then it will go through May 25th. All right, so thank you all so much. Back to you, Dan.
Thank you, Kathy. See, while we have you captive, we give you our best commercials. So do make it to Cowgirl Up if you can, especially on opening weekend. We're always looking for volunteers for you. So if you can make that kind of commitment. I'm looking for a staff person who's in charge of it. Kathy will take care of it.
I'll help.
She'll help. All right, let's get on with our speaker. Our speaker today is no stranger to any of us here, Dr. Pagan, professor of history at Arizona State University. And he is an expert on all things Arizona. And we have made a commitment as an institution over the last several years to not just tell the cowboy stories of Arizona, but to tell the stories of all the peoples of Arizona, whether they be Latino or Native or Mormon immigrants or Black Americans who migrated here. We are committed to telling all those stories. And today is an opportunity for us to tell the stories of the Yaqui people, who obviously are a big part of the history, early history of Arizona. And not only do we have Dr. Pagan, who regularly talks about all kinds of things for us, he is, and he'll share it with you, he is almost one half of his lineage is Yaqui. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Eduardo Pagan. So it's a curiosity. So my mother's family are Yaqui, and it's just a curiosity of genetics. Why I'm not 50% as opposed to like 46%. I mean, it's just genetics are very strange that way. So let me tell you a couple of funny stories. I hope they're funny before I get started. So one, I always wince a little bit when someone introduces me as an expert, because you get that one person that says, okay, expert on Arizona history. What was Henry Wickenburg's favorite dog's name? I don't know. I'm not that kind of expert. I love Arizona history though, I really do. Born and raised. And I love sharing stories about Arizona history that many people don't know about. The other story I want to share with you very quickly is the request that I repeat questions to so that it can be picked up on the camera. And it takes me back, 25 years ago, I think. So PBS, The American Experience, if you're familiar with that show, they were filming an episode, excuse me, they were filming an episode that was based on my first book. And so we found a location in downtown Los Angeles. So I want you to imagine this scene. It's the first time I've ever been on television, right? So I want you to imagine this scene. So we're in this old building, and they wanted to kind of shoot it in this kind of film noir fashion, because my first book was on a riot that took place during World War II. So they wanted to kind of pick up that artistic feel. So bright lights, literally right here, shining on me. They put the camera, it felt like it was 1 foot away from my face. I had makeup on my face for the first time in my life. So I'm sitting there, you know, and the expert, right, they're asking questions. And then the director says, look, I'm going to ask you questions, but I want you to incorporate the question into your answer. Right, so now I'm going to have to do this calculus while I'm sitting there. It took me 4 hours to get through an interview that probably should have been done in 30 minutes, because, you know, so I just remember sweating that entire experience, and somehow they found enough gems to put it together, so I didn't look like a fool, but it was quite the experience. So it's been a while. I think I can manage now. So let me share you what I want to do today, and I'm happy to share one of the areas that I love studying and sharing is really the story of the Yaqui people, and I appreciate that many people may not know about the Yaqui people. There's a reason why, and I'll show you in just a moment, but there are Yaqui communities in, it's technically Chandler, believe it or not, but it's just to the east of the South Mountain Park, on the other side of I-10. So it's called Guadalupe, you may know about it, so that is a reservation, it's a Yaqui reservation. There's a Yaqui reservation out in Tucson, and there are some non-reservation areas where Yaqui people have settled, Pagan in just outside of Scottsdale. But that's in Arizona alone. There have been other communities as well. So I want to share with you a little bit of. So let's do this. Let's step back. I want to give you this conceptual overview about humans in general, how humans conceptualize this experience, why we're here, why we exist, all these kinds of things. Because I think it's important, excuse me, I'm sorry. I think it's important because if you want to understand the Yaqui people, you need to understand the Yaqui worldview, Yaqui cosmology, how this all works, why we're here. So I want to do that. I want to do a very quick, just historical and geographical overview, so you have an idea of the areas that I'm talking about. And then I want to do a deep dive into what is the high holy day of the Yaqui liturgy, which is, it's coming up. It coincides with Easter. And everybody is welcome. If you want to take a drive down to Guadalupe, you can go there on Easter and see the celebration. But here's the thing though, that celebration, even though it coincides with Easter, and if you're practicing Roman Catholic, you'll probably look around and not recognize a thing, right? So I want to talk a little bit about how that all came about. So here's my connection. This is my maternal grandparents. This is my grandfather who came from Sonora, Mexico. Actually outside the Yaqui communities there. And so that's my connection as well. Now, I never grew up on the reservation. I grew up outside, and as I like to say, my grandfather left because he couldn't stand the politics. So any of those who are familiar with Native communities, you understand my reference, right? So with that, let's step back, and I'm going to give you this conceptual overview. This is my old professor, David Carrasco. He probably wouldn't appreciate my calling him my old professor, but he was a professor by David Carrasco. So he has an appointment at Harvard Divinity School, and he's also a professor of anthropology. And one of my takeaways from taking classes with him is I always remember this statement that he made, is that Homo sapiens, right, how we call ourselves in an anthropological sense, are better understood as Homo religiosus. So in other words, his point was that all evidence that we have of human expression, from the earliest of times documentable, we have always sought to say we are here and to contemplate our place in the cosmos. The earliest expressions we can find. So these are some very, very early paintings. You'll recognize them. Nobody understands what they mean, but my takeaway as I look at this was a way of saying, I was here. I was here. This is my community. This is my family. That's my takeaway. Some of you might be familiar with some native petroglyphs. This is actually from newspaper rock just outside of Moab, Utah, right across the border. And here's what I find interesting about it. It's called newspaper rock, as you can see that many people, different generations, have carved a number of things here. Here's why I call this human existential expression. So on the one hand, you can look at this, and this is indeed a recording of their environment, of the things that are important to them. So we will begin with right here. You can clearly see a hunter on horseback, probably shooting an elk, could have been a deer. But obviously this is important. You can see some other images as well. Buffalo up there, yes, buffalo, we're in Arizona. You see more deer or elk, other people, footprints, bear paws. You can see these things. They look like goats, mountain goats as well. That's what I find interesting. But then, in addition to that, recording things that were important to them, you find things that are difficult to explain from a modern perspective. Take a look at this figure here. What is that? We don't know. Look up there as well. We don't know. This symbol is often associated with the stars or the sun as well, right? So clearly the people who carved their experience on this rock looked up to the skies and thought about what this all is and what this all means. And understood their world as something, yes, material, but also something beyond. And in many native legends, of course, there are helpers that have always been a part of this experience. Helpers that are not mortal, but have a divine kind of presence and divine kind of help as well. So just stepping back, and I just want to share this with you again as a point, is that from my perspective, and I certainly agree with my professor, that most of human history is grounded in what we characterize as religious expression. It really is. What I teach at the university, academic history, scholarly history, that's relatively new in human expression. If you could imagine, if we did a line graph starting from the very beginning, whatever that was, all the way up to the present, this kind of history that I teach, academic history, scholarly history, is a small line on this large graph. So think about the works of literature that we still have to this day, the Code of Hammurabi, for example, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Bible, of course, the Hebrew Bible. All of these religious texts that are still meaningful in the lives of many people, they talk about human history in a very different kind of way. It's a providential kind of history, right? And again, it's a kind of history that seeks to understand our place, why we exist, where we fit in the cosmos as well. And I believe that. So most of human history is in fact grounded in what I would characterize as religious expression. And in its most fundamental form, religion, again, this is my view, religion is really a collection of ideas and acts around our innate human desire to understand and explain our presence, our meaning, and our context. What is this all about? So with that, let me do a very quick introduction to Yaqui secular history. Now, I mean by seculars, I'm just going to tell you very quickly, excuse me, I don't know why my throat is acting up here, but Yaqui secular history, I just want to tell you very quickly about geography and history, just very, very, very quickly. So who are the Yaqui people, right? Like many native communities, thank you so much, like many native communities, the word Yaqui is not their term, right? So some of you may know, for example, the Navajo do not call themselves. I mean, they do now, but that's not their name, right? Diné was their name. Apache as well. Inde was their name, right? And so the names that they call themselves are not the names that we in the present give to them. Now, of course, Navajo will call themselves Navajo because that's how they're known, and Yaqui are the same way. But actually, in the Yaqui language, they're called Yoemen, Yoemen, which means a person or the people. Yoemen is the people. Now, they're home based in northern Mexico. If you know the geography, and I'll show you a map in just a moment, it's along what's known as the Rio Yaqui, the Yaqui River, which stretches for miles and miles and miles. There are about 80 villages that are there. And they're part of the Uto-Aztecan language family. And it's estimated there are probably about 100,000 at the time of the first Spanish contact. Now, there are different spellings of Yaqui. There you see it with the Y, that's probably the most common, or with the J. I prefer the Yaqui symbol with the H because it's closest to the pronunciation of Yaqui in Yoemen, right? So in Arizona, the Yaqui are commonly known as the Pascua Yaqui, and it's because the High Holy Day, which is coming up, Waema, coincides with Easter. Now I'll explain all of that just a moment. Let's do a very quick geography. This is a deer dancer. This is probably the most famous figure from the outside looking in. Deer brother, whom this deer dancer represents, is very important in the Yaqui cosmology, and I'll situate him in just a moment. But this is very characteristic of many native traditions, is that in adorning yourself in the symbols of divine figures, and dances and song invoke the presence of the divine with you. That's why it's very important. And you'll see this in a variety of things. And we have a kachina here as well. This is the same kind of concept as when you adorn yourself in those symbols and you practice the sacred dances and the sacred songs, you're inviting the presence of the divine with you. And that's part of what the deer dancer does. But I'll locate why the deer is so important in Yaqui cosmology in just a moment. So this is, as you'll notice, quick map. Spanish, I apologize, but you'll recognize the Gulf of California. I think we're still calling it that. The state of Sonora as well. Now this is, again, if you're familiar with Sonora, this is Ciudad Obregón, or Obregón City, which happens to be my middle name. These in gold, these are the Yaqui communities there. So there are a number of them as well. Now, very, very quickly about the Yaqui story. Again, I'm just telling you the secular, I missed a slide, or is it backwards? Oh, okay, sorry. Very quickly, when the Spanish came, their mission was to spread Roman Catholicism. Of course, they brought the Jesuits as well. When the Spanish came, the Yaqui stopped them, literally drew a line in the sand and told them, "Do not cross." They didn't cross, and the Yaqui resisted the Spanish for a long time. The missionaries talked about bringing the gospel of salvation. The Yaqui response was, "We've got all of that, thank you very much." But around 1617, the Yaqui invite the Jesuit missionaries to go ahead and live within the different communities. And it's really because they were smart enough to recognize that when the Jesuits were present, the Spanish soldiers left them alone. So it's a way of just kind of creating this protection for them, for themselves. But the Yaqui themselves, this is, again, speaking as a historian, the Yaqui have been at war for their autonomy and independence for a very, very long time. And it's waxed and waned, as you can imagine, right? There have been times when they were in outright shooting bullets and fighting, and other times it was more passive resistance. But from the Yaqui, for those who study Yaqui history, it's been a very, very long struggle to maintain their autonomy as well. So from that, though, and let me just say very, very quickly, in the 1930s, the Mexican government decided to crack down on Yaqui insistence for autonomy and independence. Now, I like to characterize the Yaqui in Mexican history as kind of like the Apaches in American history, right? So the Apaches are often conceptualized as the most fierce, the most warlike, the most resistant to colonizing. That's the place that the Yaqui occupy in Mexican history as well. So in the 1930s, the Mexican government cracked down on these struggles for independence. And they used modern armaments, right? Repeating rifles, airplanes, motorized vehicles, you can imagine that as well. What that did is it created a diaspora. In other words, there were many people who then fled from the Yaqui communities, and they fled northward. And so, as I mentioned before, in Tucson, there's Barrio Libre and in Pascua as well. These are Yaqui communities, Old Pascua there, and you see Guadalupe over there by Phoenix. A little bit higher up, it's not on the map, it's Pagan as well. It's not a reservation, but it's a group of neighborhoods and families that settled up there in Scottsdale as well. They went to many places as well, not just Arizona. So there's the Texas Band of Yaqui Indians who are not federally recognized. The Pascua Yaqui in Arizona are federally recognized. The California Yaqui organization, they are not federally recognized. So for those of you who do work or if you've ever done work in Native communities in the United States, there are the federally recognized tribes. And there are many other groups that still live in tribal communities, but they're not federally recognized for a variety of reasons. So my point is that the Pascua Yaqui did receive federal recognition during the Carter administration. Let's think about that for just a moment. They worked for a very long time to get federal recognition to protect their lands as well, but there are other groups of Yaqui that have yet to receive that kind of recognition. So now with that, let's do some geography. I want to focus in on Guadalupe. So here we are. You recognize Phoenix, I-17 to 60. This is the 10 that take you all the way down to Tucson, and this is Guadalupe right here. Over here by the South Mountain Park Reserve, and just to the east of that is Guadalupe right there. As I said before, I think technically they're part of Chandler. If you go there to this day, this is what I want to point out. If you go to this day, there's a large open field which is very important. You'll notice to your right, there's a Catholic church, and to your left is a Yaqui church. I want to argue that that's significant. So again, I want to say that again. There's a Catholic church there. There's a priest who was dedicated to doing services and sacraments there as well. But to the left is the Yaqui church. So think about that. There are two churches right next to each other. That is a very, very interesting relationship. And this open ground is significant because again, remember Waema, which happens around Easter. This is the high holy day. This is the most important day of the year. Happens right there. So if you go, you'll see this kind of market atmosphere as well. But there will be, I want to call them performances. There will be rites going on. We'll put it that. Now, before we do a deep dive into Waema, let me now talk a little bit about Yaqui cosmology, because as I said, I think it's important to understand kind of the Yaqui worldview, then to understand Waema better. And this is why. If you study the Yaqui people, and it's been well studied by anthropologists, they all argue the same thing. They all argue that the Yaqui took Roman Catholicism, refashioned it into a kind of native Catholicism, right? I argue against that. And I published articles arguing against it as well. Because when you start to walk through the celebrations and you walk through the figures who were present during these celebrations, again, for those of you who are practicing Roman Catholic, you will not recognize a thing, right? Not a thing. And that's why I argue that no, this is not Indian Catholicism. This is still Yaqui. Again, the celebrations coincide with the Roman Catholic liturgy, but it doesn't mean that they are. So with that, let's step back, Yaqui cosmology. So the Yaqui, when they think about existence, these are known as aneo. I like to liken it kind of like multi-universe theory, right? You're all familiar with that concept that who knows, there may be multiple universes out there, multiple copies of you as well, right? You know, that current scientific theory. Maybe so, I don't know. But it's similar to the way that Yaqui think about the cosmos. There are different places that exist that you can access through ritual. There are healers that can access those different places as well. The Tucania, the night world, the Tenkuania as well, the dream world. This right here, Senia, the flower world, is the most important realm. We'll call it a realm. It's the most important place that you can access. It is what I would characterize the equivalent of heaven, or perhaps a Garden of Eden. Just think about this very, very privileged space, very, very special. It is there that dear brother resides, right? right? That's why it's so important. There are these other worlds as well that you can access. So think of, we don't just inhabit this mortal realm. There are other realms that exist that can be accessed as well through ritual and prayer and so on. So this is just my representation of Sandia. If any of you have been to the Burchard Gardens in British Columbia, if you haven't, you've got to go. I would say it's got to be one of your bucket list destinations. Burchard Gardens are the most fabulous gardens I've ever been to. Flowers everywhere. And I was down in the Burchard Gardens one day and I was looking around and I was going, this is Sandia. It was just so glorious. Just to imagine a place like this and flowers filled everywhere. Everywhere you look was beauty, right? That's the image I want to get across of Sandia. Just imagine a world where everything is infused with flowers. Flowers are highly significant to the Yaqui. It's a symbol. They're very, very important. You'll see that represented on clothing and all kinds of things. Now with that though, let me tell you the story about how this all came to be. This mortal realm that we occupy. So I'll take you back to the beginning. So in the beginning, before this world existed, the Yaqui lived in a place where they were called Surim. And they didn't look like we look now as humans. They had a different form, and there are lots of discussions about what that form looked like. But they lived in a place of just beauty and harmony. It was. Plants could talk, animals could talk. It was just a glorious existence. And they were happy. And one day, a tree appeared. People didn't know where it came from, didn't know why it was there, but it simply appeared. And this tree began to make a noise. Now, different accounts will characterize that noise as the sound of a multitude of birds, or perhaps a humming. But the Surim knew that this special tree was trying to communicate, but they couldn't figure out what the tree was saying at all. And so they searched high and low. Does anyone know what this tree is trying to say? They looked everywhere. And finally they came across a female, a woman. Now, I'm kind of pausing here because there are different versions about either she was a young girl or that she was an older woman as well. Her name was Yomumali, which means the divine bee, right? As an Apian bee, right? So she was either a young woman or she was an older woman as well. Again, different versions, it depends. I like the version that says she was actually Itom Ae. And Itom Ae is the Yoeme name for the mother deity. And it literally translates as Heavenly Mother in heaven, right? So the Yaqui do believe in heavenly parents. So Itom Achai, who's the father, and Itom Ae, who's the mother as well. And I like that version that says that her identity was really Itom Ae as well. She was the one who came forward and said that there is this tree is trying to tell you that you have a choice now. You're at a crossroads. And the choice is you can continue on in this existence, or you can become Yoeme. You can become mortal. You can become people. You'll experience joys. You'll experience love. You'll have happiness as well. But there's a catch. If you become mortal, you'll also become subject to death, to disease, to pain. People will try and come and take your lands, but you will not be left without help. And this is where this figure comes in mind. A great healer will be sent among you. There are different descriptions of this great healer. A santero, a cure, a healer. His name would be Yaqui, and this is how you know him. And he would come to live among you and heal you, right? And so this is important because we'll come back to it. But he will be a shaman, if you will, right? A healer. So there were a number of Surim who chose to make the next step, right? They chose to become mortal. And so they became Yoeme. They became the people. There were some who rejected the choice. They were happy where they were and they stayed where they were. And there are lots of stories about what happened to them, but in general, the Yaqui believe that they're out there. And you can see them from time to time. They're out in the wilderness. So those who accepted the future, they became Yaqui as well. And so when the Suda became Yoeme, right? So in other words, those who lived before this mortality became human. They were naked, they were cold, they were hungry, and they pled to their sacred parents, help us. And they sent a dear brother, who volunteered to become a sacrifice so that the deer's skin would be their clothes, the deer's meat would be the food that they would eat. And so the Yaqui memorialized that great sacrifice that was made so that we could continue existing. And that's where dear brother comes into play. Dear brother was the first person who allowed this experience to continue on. So that's why dear brother is so important. So yeah, again, just to recap, to become Yoeme or Yaqui was a choice, and it was founded upon promises about life, protections of the divine parents, and the great healer that would come as well. And now in Arizona, the Yaqui are known as the Pascua Yaqui, and it's because, again, the High Holy Day, the most important day of the calendar year, coincides with Easter. So for those of you who know Spanish, Pascua is Easter, right? So that's why they're known as the Pascua Yaqui, because of that. So in fact, this is the official symbol, and you notice the flowers in there as well. That cross, a lot of people look at that cross and they say, oh, that's a Christian cross. Actually, from a Yaqui perspective, it's not. The cross is actually a representation of the four corners of the earth. And again, there's meaning behind that as well. And if we have time, I can do that as well. Now with that quick overview of just kind of like the Yaqui worldview, let's now look at this celebration that's coming up in April 4th, I think, is Easter for this year. So again, take us back to Guadalupe, and this is where you're going to see this. And again, it's that big patch of dirt that I'm showing to you. So this is the Yaqui church here. This is the Catholic church here. This is where I want to focus in right here. You would think that nothing is happening there, but no, this place is very important, very, very significant. So there we are, Catholic church, Yaqui church on both sides. All right, so Guadalupe. The organization of Guadalupe, it's very organized. There's a group of leaders known as maestros. Spanish does mean leaders as well. So these are community leaders. They have expertise both in Catholic dogma and Yaqui history. And they're the ones who organize and oversee this celebration. And they're the ones that officially close the celebration. It has no official relationship with the Catholic Church at all. None, right? So this is taking place outside in that plaza before Easter. Now, Easter is celebrated. Easter Mass is celebrated. They do go after these celebrations or these Yaqui celebrations. They do go to Mass, but then they come out and they finish up their celebration as well. So I want to just say very quickly that there are different organizations. I want to focus in on this bottom one here, and we'll talk a little bit about some of these others. But they're, again, at the risk of getting too much detail, they're Matichinis, Pacuelas. These are figures you'll see always. The deer dancers represent dear brother. They're singers. And they're altar women, flag girls, bearers of the Virgen de Guadalupe, angelical angels. Now, notice this. Judas, caballeros. Anyone knows? Someone should know here. What does caballeros mean? Gentlemen, yes. Gentlemen, and the reason why they're called caballeros is because in Spanish history, it was only the gentry, the gentlemen that rode horses, right? Caballeros. So this is important. Fariseos, does anyone know what that means? Pharisees. So this is where things get really interesting. And then, out of respect to Yaqui belief and practice, I will not pronounce the last word there. But I will simply say that in Yoeme, in the Yaqui tongue, it translates as a folded nose. So again, think about a snarling beast, a coyote or a wolf or a dog. We've all seen that snarling. That's what it means, right? So it is not a happy term. It is a term that represents threat. So with that, this is the kind of procession that you will see. And you will see people dressed in different garb. And I want to focus on the folded noses back here for just a moment about why they're important as well. So as I mentioned before, the deer dancer is present. These are the pacolas as well. It represents an old man. Again, there's too much detail. But the deer dancer is always present as a way of welcoming back that first being that allowed us to exist. Another picture as well. By the way, let me just say this. If you do go to Waima, you are not allowed to take pictures. And so people have taken pictures, and I just stole those off the internet, so these are not my pictures. But otherwise, I'm just waving my hands trying to paint pictures, and you don't know what I'm talking about. So there we are. So here we are. We're going to focus in on what is known as Holy Saturday and after the Easter Vigil. So this is outside the church. And I'm going to focus on the roles of Jesucristo, Pacualas, the deer dancers, and maestros as well. So, the Yaqui concept of Jesucristo, Jesus Christ. You see a figure there on a cross. This is the Yaqui concept. There's a lot of discussion among Yaqui about who Jesus Christ is in the cosmology of the Yaqui. A very common term for Jesus Christ is El Viejo, the old one. The old one, El Viejo as well. There are many who believe that Jesucristo walked among and taught the ancestral Yaqui. There are many who believe that as well. There are many who believe that Jesucristo was in fact Yaqui. He was a Yaqui shaman, right? All right, so the deer dancers and singers, you'll see this, and again, I argue against this. I think anthropologists are wrong. They argue that the deer dance originated from hunting ceremonies. I can see why they say that. But again, if you understand Yaqui cosmology, it's not a hunting ceremony. It's about welcoming dear brother back to our presence. Dear brother who lives in Serrania, the high holy realm that where we hope to all go. We're welcoming him back to our presence as we remember our history. And the deer dancer or dear brother, it speaks about sacrifice. It speaks about humility, about community harmony, about providing for the community, about cosmic balance. That's what it means. And so I reject this anthropological argument that it's an old hunting dance. I kind of get why they did this. So here we are. I'm going to focus in on these figures as well, the folded noses. You will note the human form of this one right here. In other words, you can see the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the beard, right? Although, you know, there's something else going on, and you'll see this in just a moment. They are led by caballeros. So just wrap your mind around this for just a moment. Remember I mentioned that these individuals, their name is the folded noses. They don't represent a positive thing. They represent a threat. And this threat is represented by who? The Spanish caballeros. Right? So now you're starting to hopefully make the connection between history and the Yaqui worldview. Is that those beings that represent a threat to the Yaqui are represented and led by foreigners, right? The Spanish caballeros, right? Okay, so they are allies of Judas, if you know the story of Jesus Christ, the Fariseos, and therefore they, as well as the caballeros, are enemies of Jesucristo. So again, I want you to think about that for just a moment. This is very different than, again, if you're familiar with any Christian celebration of Easter. The Pharisees and Judas and the Spanish are enemies of Jesus Christ. Okay? So that's what I find really interesting, because from a Spanish perspective, it's like, hey, like we're the ones who brought salvation to you guys, right? But from the Yaqui perspective, it's like, no, you didn't, and you're actually an enemy of Jesucristo, right? Now, the role of the folded noses is to thwart Jesucristo from his eternal role and reward. So they try and do this. Here's one other thing I want to point out. The long nose, or the folded nose. Notice they are carrying what look like, these are swords, and these are daggers. If I were a better military historian, I'd be able to tell you there's a name for the short sword as well. But I want you to notice at the very top, notice the red, and the same thing with the dagger. These swords, or these instruments represent violence. And the red represents blood. So already these instruments of violence have been dipped in Yaqui blood. Already they have hurt us. Already they have struck. And now they're circling the community for 40 days before Waima ends, right? So hopefully you see the symbolism that's going on, is that there are exterior threats to our well-being and our solidarity as a people. And that's who they represent. And last thing I want to point out is that when you see these long noses or folded noses, again, from a native perspective, Europeans had beards, right, and long noses. And you will see that represented often in these images. Let me show you a few more. Here's another one, long nose, beard, notice the color of skin, right? So you're beginning to understand then who these figures represent. But I want you to notice back here, Donald Duck, right? Over here as well. And you will see other images that represent other threats to the Yaqui well-being. There's Bugs Bunny. You see possibly Mickey Mouse, probably something from, what was that movie? The Monsters, Inc., right? Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is because there's not just one threat to the Yaqui community or to Yaqui culture. There are many threats, even American popular culture. And we know this as well when you work in Native American history communities. Young people are moving on and moving out, and they're not retaining the stories and the practices. And that constitutes a threat as well, right? What happens when your community, the stories that have held you together for generations, what happens when the new generations leave and they're not interested, right? So again, that's why there are other elements of American popular culture. Sometimes I've seen representations of American military, right? So you'll see the helmet and things like that. So anything that constitutes a threat to Yaqui community, history, solidarity, it's represented. This one is literally, you see the folded nose right there. All right, again, I just want to point this out. It's no accident that many of the masks are fair-skinned, bearded individuals. Again, it's calling back to this long Yaqui fight for independence, for autonomy against Europeans, right? Now, I should say this as well, as I'm talking about this. The Yaqui word for enemy is yore, okay? As I've talked to you before, the Yaqui are home based in Sonora, which is a northern state of Mexico, right on the other side of the Arizona border. Guess what their word for Mexican is? Yore. It's the same thing, right? And so the Yaqui do not see themselves as Mexican. They see the Mexicans as just as bad as the Spaniards, right? Because again, it was the Mexican government that cracked down on the Yaqui with modern armaments. There were massacres, there was forced enslavement, forced marches. I'd mentioned the 1930s, many of them were rounded up and taken to the Yucatan Peninsula, if you remember the Mexican map in the Gulf, and forced to work on the sugar plantations there. Many of them died. They died in the forced march, and they died in the plantations as well, which then prompted this diasporic spread of the Yaqui. So for them, their place within the Mexican government is not a favored place at all, and they remember that, right? So let's get back to Waima though. So Waima comes when the community gathers together and they defeat Judas, the Caballeros, and also the folded noses as well, right? This is an actual image. Now there's the Angelito, those young ladies in white dress, and you notice they're raising symbolic sticks. And they're beating away the enemies of Jesucristo with whom the Yaqui identify. And here's another, now the folded noses, they are defeated when the community joins together, led by the Pancolas, the deer dancer, again, very significant images within the Yaqui culture and worldview and cosmology, and they kill these folded noses with flowers, the semwa, which is really interesting. Let me show you a picture of this. I'll try to explain why this is significant, killing someone with flowers, right? So flowers, as I mentioned before, are highly significant for the Yaqui people. You'll see it all over their clothing, in their homes. You'll see a cross in the shape, the flowers all over the cross. Again, the flowers are the ultimate expression of the love of the divine forces for humans. They bring beauty, they bring joy. It's the ultimate expression. And so what they're doing at this moment, this whole ceremony culminates in this moment where everyone comes together. They take paper flowers and they throw it at the enemies of Jesucristo. And by so doing, what they're doing is they're reaching back into their cosmology, and they're pulling a part of this holy realm, Sandia, and they're throwing it, and you are not going to defeat us, because we're reaching back into this holy place that is important to us and has always been important to us. And this is how you're going to be destroyed. You see the connection, right? So it might seem strange on its face that flowers are an instrument of killing the enemies of the Yaqui people. But when you see the symbolism, you get it, right? This is how we protect ourselves, by reaching back into our history, our sacred stories about where we come from and how we situate in this world. And this is how this comes about. And in fact, literally what happens is that those, I guess I could call them actors, those brotherhoods that put the Yaqui mask, or the mask of the long noses on them, and they, for 40 days, they walk around the community and they clack their swords. I find that also interesting as well. This is a European practice, all the way back to the Romans. When the Romans would march and they wanted to intimidate their enemies, they would clack their swords against their shields. And it's interesting that to this day, in Arizona 2025, these folded noses, as they're marching in formation, they're literally marching like this. They're clacking their weapons together, right? It's this interesting cultural memory of when the Spaniards came upon them multiple times, I should add. But they are defeated. And they're defeated by history, by tradition, by cosmology that are made into the Yaqui people as well. So, but I want to say this, that the celebration of Waima doesn't end then, at that point, and it doesn't end when everybody says, okay, let's go to Mass now, and let's celebrate Easter. It actually ends after Mass. Everyone gathers together in the plaza, and they gather together in the form of a circle. And again, for those of you who are familiar with Native cosmology, the circle is highly important. The circle represents so many things. Harmony, it represents the eternities, it represents wholeness, it represents healing. I mean, the circle is very important for many communities. So they gather together in this circle, and the maestros then teach them. They teach the people. And this is what they said, this is our day of forgiveness. Let everything go that happened this past year, and then Waima is over. And so my point is that even though the Yaqui are called Pascua Yaqui, Easter Yaqui, it doesn't, Easter Mass is only a part of this 40-day celebration that invokes all kinds of images and personnel and personae that are thoroughly Yaqui. They're not biblical in the slightest. Even though some of them have those names, as you've seen, as I've shown pictures, these are not, the folded noses, these are not representations of any biblical images whatsoever. If you know the story of Jesus, none of this, coincides with the story of Jesus as well. But they very much identify with the story of the passion of Jesus Christ. They very much identify with suffering and pain, but suffering and pain that eventually comes to a celebratory outcome. And so the Yaqui very much do identify with that. That's part of the reason why you'll see this. So my argument, as I present, and this is my interpretation, but I think I stand on solid ground. The reenactment of Jesucristo is not the story of Jesus in the Bible at all. Again, if you're familiar with it, you'll see all this kind of stuff. It's like, no, this is not. It is the story of a Yaqui Jesucristo. And the Yaqui celebration of Waima is a community reenactment of attack, persecution, and betrayal. But it's also a story of survival and victory through the power of sacred memory and community solidarity. That's really what this is all about. And so my point is, and this is what I've argued, and who knows whether this is going to change the field or not, time will tell. But my argument is that Yaqui religiosity, it goes beyond imitation. This is not Catholic light. This is not Native Catholicism. This is a reassertion of Yaqui belief that incorporates other elements of worship. That's true. That's very common at many people. And if you've heard my presentations about Christmas and about Easter, we've talked about the kind of how these pagan elements got joined in together with the Christian story. Many people do that. Many people draw from other elements and bring it into their sacred narratives. And certainly there's some of that goes on, but that's not what explains Yaqui religiosity or the Yaqui cosmology as well. It's actually a reaffirmation of Yaqui identity and cultural renewal by saying strength is found when we come together and we defend one another. That's what this is really about. So that said, I thought it was going to go very long, and so I'm glad to see that I kind of hit my mark on that. There's a problem when you know too much. It's hard to know how to condense it within about 45, 50 minutes, but it looks like I made it. So with that, that ends my presentation. If there are questions that I can answer, I will certainly try, but if not, then we'll go on to enjoy this beautiful day. So, any questions? Okay, yes?
The one symbol that
Oh, there we go, okay.
pardon me, hi. The one symbol that I depict as the medicine wheel, you depict it as the sun.
Yeah.
Okay, can you talk about that?
Yeah.
And a little, to some it looks like a piece of pie.
Yeah, it could be a medicine, but that's a problem with petroglyphs, is we don't have people around to explain it, and so it's a lot of interpretation. I guess I would just simply say, I wouldn't say that it's not a medicine wheel. That's the thing about symbols, is symbols can be interpreted in different layers and different levels and have different meaning to different people. Yeah, so it could be a medicine wheel, absolutely. But again, as I think about kind of the otherworldly images that you see in lots of petroglyphs, in other words, they're not physical things that we recognize, but they look like things that are different than this material world that we live in. To me, that points to a mindset that is really looking beyond, looking to the stars and trying to understand. But again, that's my reading, my bias as well. So I would say both, right? It could be a medicine wheel, it could be a representation of the stars. And that's kind of where my mind goes. So yeah, thank you for that question. Was there another question for you? Yeah, right there.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. It's so fascinating. I had a question about who gets to choose what role. You know, is there some kind of lineage that determines that you would always be depicted as a twisted nose?
Yeah.
Or is, you know, who gets to be the villains and who gets to be the heroes?
Right.
And there must be some organization or some way that you can determine that.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great question. So I can tell you about the twisted noses, the folded noses. It's a brotherhood. It's a fraternity. And it's something they prepare for all year long. And they take their role very, very seriously. And so again, you just don't walk up and put on the mask and start walking around. It's something that you take very, very seriously. Like any of the reenactments that you will see in Native communities, it's very, very serious. And it's a brotherhood as well. That's a good question. I don't know with all the roles. I'm thinking about, for example, like the young ladies who play the Anahelido. That I don't know. I've never looked at it. My focus is much more on these figures that look like they're Katinas, but they're not. And what do they mean? And so that's been really my focus in trying to understand that. But the other roles, the deer dancers, I can tell you the deer dancers, you have to apprentice, you have to learn, you have to know the songs, you have to know the movements, right? The singers as well that play, again, it's an apprentice thing. You can express an interest and you can express a desire to become an apprentice. And over time, you know, you'll have to study with someone who knows what they're doing and then you'll pass on. But, so part of it is voluntary. I can't tell you with this fraternity, part of it is families. So there have been families that have been doing this for a very long time. And their adornment are passed down. So it's part genealogy, if you will, part family. Also, again, it's a way of just showing your investment in the communities and you want to get involved in this important day that really brings a lot of things together. So, good question, thank you. Yes?
I heard that the Japanese masks are all destroyed at the end of the ceremony.
Yeah, thank you. And I did, so she was saying that the mask and the folded noses are all destroyed, and I skipped over that part. Yes, so what happens, and I just realized now I did, what happens is when the enemies are defeated, what the reenactors do, I don't want to call it dancers, yes, but it's more than that, right? What the reenactors do is that they will then remove their masks and they will put them down and they are destroyed at the end. But there are still historic ones that are around that you can find, right? And so there are some that are saved. But typically that's what goes with it. And I suppose if a family said, you know what, I want to, this is my great-grandfather's, let's pull this one out. I'm sure that would happen as well. So again, you can find historic ones. Wouldn't display them in a museum out of respect, but yeah, typically they are. And it's a representation that they're then destroyed, defeated, decapitated, and then those who actually play those roles, and they go into mass and then they reintegrate in the community and kind of take their place again. So yes, thank you for that. Oh yes, one more. So thank you. So if you're familiar, so the question is, do the Yaquis have a clan system or are they families? So if you're familiar with Navajos, for example, this is, and someone the other day saying that when a Navajo says hello, it takes 5 minutes, right? Because they're introducing who their clan, their mother's clan is, and all this. So the Yaqui don't do that. And so to my knowledge, there aren't operative clans. I could be wrong, but I've never come across any. I've never been told of any clan that my ancestors belong to. So I don't think it's quite the same way as the Navajo, for example, which is a very established system that they have. Yeah, so. All right, thank you so much, and we will see. Oh, yeah, happy to talk afterwards, right?
You said the celebration started a couple of days before.
So no, 40 days before, but the actual moment when it all comes together is coincides with Easter, which I believe is April 2nd this year. But if you go there today, you won't see much happening. You might see these folded noses walking around, but that's about all you'll see. But in terms of like seeing the action, right, where everything comes together, people come together, flowers are being thrown, that's on Easter Sunday. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody.